Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Carol Bowser to talk about conflict management. Carol, welcome to the show.
So pleased to be here.
So I'm curious to know your superhero origin story. That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits?
Well, go back to, the origin story always goes back a year or two because I think everybody needs opportunities, trial and travail, of getting up and doing it all over again for any type of skill set. And when I was early on in sort of my mediation conflict resolution career, and I don't remember specifically, but I think it might have been at the same point in time when I was going to law school. And I recall I was called in to work with a local nonprofit that had national reach, but this was their specific office. And I remember how deeply, deeply personal the mission was to the staff. And that there was conflict because there was differences of opinion about where the emphasis should be and how much dedication there should be. And with nonprofits that are very, very mission driven, that you have people who are highly passionate about the mission and they may have differences in opinion about how the organization is meeting that mission or not meeting that mission, or what their coworkers, if it's within this the specific working relationship and not necessarily with the board of directors or with donors or with the public. And I just remember that somebody felt so passionate about this, but the way that this person was going about expressing their passion alienated the other folks. And then since then, because some themes of conflict are universal, I've expanded to different types of nonprofits, some in higher education, some nonprofits that have in healthcare, which have very, very different budgets and maybe community-based nonprofits, and then some that are in the social services, some that are within the arts, some that are within education, and some that are within the environment. So, like every superhero and hopefully everybody else, every opportunity is an opportunity for learning and growth, and it's just gone on since then.
Awesome. And today you offer services, right? You have a consulting firm that helps with conflict management.
Yes, conflict management strategies helps organizations either address or prevent workplace conflict. And that can be through mediating disputes among key people. It can be around facilitating group work, whether that's with the staff, with the executive board, or it could be with senior leadership. And sometimes it's coaching because in maybe executive directors and other key leaders need to improve their leadership, including how they address and guide their staffs and their boards and their donors through conflict.
And I was really excited to have this conversation because I think conflict is to be expected. I remember the expression a long time ago that success is not an absence of problems, it's an ability to deal with them. And I think if we can put certain places or processes in place and mitigate conflict as much as you can before it happens, because it's going to happen. But before we get into the details, I'm curious if we could just paint a picture of what exactly is conflict management and how does it relate to stuff like, or how would you maybe subdivide, arguments versus debates versus disagreements versus, full on head to head.
Yeah, I like to use the expression same, but different. And I view it in a couple of different ways. One, that a conflict means that something important is going on, that chances are there's a clash of values or a clash of behaviors that people view as symbolically significant of core values like trust, transparency, communication, good leadership, good coworkers. And people can have disagreements, but it's when it starts becoming entrenched and we're starting to feel as though there is an impasse and we're starting to get into blaming and shaming of the people. And then more importantly, as leaders, if you're starting to see what I call organizational drag of things aren't getting done, we're spending more of our time navigating the interpersonal relationships. Maybe you're hearing more complaints, maybe that key processes aren't getting done or they're getting more convoluted because people are annoyed with one another. Those types of things are happening. And then, obviously we have, on the higher thing where conflict is getting, highly, highly escalated, where it's more positional, us versus them. If I want the other person to lose, and people start getting more adamant and entrenched in the rightness or maybe even the righteousness of their own position, that they actually stop working and functioning. Maybe you have people on the board who are looking to leave. Maybe you are having donors who are upset. Maybe you're having key staff leaving or just getting really, really frustrated that, coming to work and doing the work that they thought was going to be so rewarding is much more emotionally and psychologically taxing without feeling as though they're making sufficient progress to justify the emotional and psychological workload.
I like the fact that you said it was important. It's a topic that is important because you're right. If it's not important, usually you don't have a conflict about it. You just kind of go with the flow. And then the trust of values. Yeah, I mean, trust, transparency, communication, leadership, coworkers. So this is obviously something that not only is it important to you, but you really want to share that your perspective and your view with other people, and the others may have it or do have a different opinion. So are these the most common types of clashes or conflicts? I mean, if you could maybe just point out to what you see as a very oftenly a reoccurring types of conflict, and maybe we can discuss each one in a bit more detail.
So I always view it as though it's a clash of values. And if people say, well, it's just not right, that's not the way it should be, it's telling you that they have a certain expectation about how the world or the workplace or the organization is supposed to function. And oftentimes we don't take a pause and explore what that looks like. And it may be that the systems or the processes or past institutional memory have kind of got things a bit entrenched. And when we're asking people, come into this organization, you're going to find value here. We are going to value you, but they're not finding value and they're not feeling valued. I think that's kind of clear across the board. So being able to take a look at it is, what is it that people are complaining about or expressing a desire to be different? And one of the things that I do, and I try to encourage other people to do, is when we say, we're actively listening and we're trying to problem solve, I'm like, oh, well, what are you actively listening for? Are you just hearing a complaint after a complaint after a complaint and then not wanting to hear that anymore? I also believe that a complaint is nothing more than a request in disguise. And at work, we may find that there is a system or a process or a mode of communicating that feels like it's interfering with our ability to be fully there at work and do our best work. So one of the themes that I look at is, what is going on that people feel impeded at work by? And for nonprofit leaders and managers that of listening for it, if they're complaining about a system or a process or a person or timing or too much oversight or a lack of oversight, they're kind of expressing their desire of what their preferred way of work is, and be able to kind of tease that out a little bit. And I do want to call out to people, it's at times, the organization, the strategic goals, the staffing, the budget, the technology, the level of knowledge may not allow everyone to get their way. However, being able to address it of you can't necessarily do that now, but it's still important to be able to bring those ideas forward.
So you're listening for systems, processes, persons. So each one has its own challenges, right? I mean, if you're disagreeing about how a system should work versus how a process should work versus how a person should work, are there like strategies for each, or is there a common element across all three of them that you can apply to help mitigate or resolve this conflict?
Certainly. I think one of the things as you're listening for all of those items, in as much as you can kind of depersonalize it, oh, Carol's just complaining about this because this is Carol's issue. Joyce is complaining about this because Joyce would prefer to have more autonomy. Being able to kind of listen past the complaint and being able to take a learning, kind of again, going and increasing the own superpower of what is it that people are asking for? And is there the ability to, to adapt? Or if there's not an ability to adapt, be able to say, I don't see how we can adapt this here. But I want to say we hire people for their intelligence and their skills. And when people are bringing forward complaints, either about a system or a process or a person, they're articulating that I don't feel as though my knowledge and skills are really being fully utilized. So if you can even ask that question of, and I'll hearken that this is in parallel to the concept of a stay interview of, and even like the Gallup 12 surveys about, do you have the systems and processes to be able to do your job? Being able to ask, are we fully utilizing your knowledge, your skill, your interest, and your talent? And being able to find out where people feel impeded, then we can have a curiosity conversation about, is there some way to some kind of acceptable or minimal degree that we might be able to address this? I think that that's a really good place to start. One of my, I think, talents is being able to create an environment where people can talk about things that are important to them, and being able to kind of understand your people and what is important to them, and seeing how much of that can be delivered while maintaining the priorities of the organization and not having it be so customized to every single person that from the outside, it looks like chaos. Not many people thrive in consistently inconsistent.
Yeah, definitely. And feeling like you're contributing, especially in a nonprofit organization, is a big reason why I think a lot of people do it, is because they do feel like they're having an impact. And then if their needs or desires or their values are not being met, then for sure, I mean, that's going to lead to conflict. It also sounds like that stay interview that you mentioned is a great way to mitigate that, is to try to address the issue before it becomes an issue. My mom always used to talk about, maintaining a house, right? When you have a house, it's better to always maintain it on a regular basis, to take care of those small issues before they become larger issues, because then, of course, it'll cost more and take more time. So you want to focus on them before they become larger. I think the same kind of principle applies here, in that the more you can talk to your people on a more regular basis and have that transaction on a much more friendly, before it becomes a little more, let's say, aggressive, then you will have a better chance of avoiding most conflict altogether. Would you say that would be true?
Absolutely. And Alex, I love that analogy, since I spent about 3 hours yesterday putting away weeks worth of clean laundry. And 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 it's much easier to maintain stuff. However, I will say, to my own defense, there are often times where priorities are rerouted, and it's like, we have gone through so much stuff. This one thing took the focus, and that meant that other things kind of fell by the wayside, and they can pile up. The same holds true for organizations, and specifically in nonprofits, we may have, an executive director If you're large enough, the executive directors, much like a CEO, a lot of their focus is external to the organization, building alliances, maybe working with grant writers, identifying donors, doing lobbying activities, and it's externally focused. And so oftentimes the executive director is maybe relying on, the assistant executive directors for the more internal pieces. And so that can be difficult when we're trying to balance so much. And if the executive director and maybe the assistant executive director have different leadership approaches, maybe your audience is seeing this. There may be longtime executive directors who are beloved, who then end up leaving. And then you have someone new coming in who has a different approach, maybe slightly different priorities, doesn't have all of the working relationships that were present. And that can be a real struggle, because one thing I have seen is maybe as the organization grows, the executive director then looks to be more functioning outside. And then we have other people or directors having to function very well inside the organization. If there are different approaches, then that can maybe not look so good, or stuff like my laundry is piled up before the executive director comes back in to have focus. And then rather than having just a day or a load or two of laundry, you've got, not that I'm throwing myself under the bus here, weeks worth of laundry to be able to sort through, which takes time and attention.
Yeah, having a new ED come in definitely is a plentiful source of opportunity, at least for conflict, because they have their own perspective on how things work and where the attention of the organization should be. I'm curious to know, I was hoping to dive in just a couple, not necessarily dive, but at least touch upon a couple of different kinds of conflicts that I think that I've seen, and definitely in my experience, and to know, how would you generally advise nonprofits to manage this on their own as best as they can? We'll get to the point where seeking outside help is probably the better way to go. But if you could offer certain tips or tricks or hints or guides to allow nonprofits to help themselves before they need to get to that point, for like a couple of these items, is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first one, for example, is
great.
People have different values, right? The mission, let's say, is people agree on the mission, but the how to get to that goal differs from person to person, right? And let's say these two people are more or less equal status, because I don't want to get into the power dynamics just yet. But let's say you got two people, equal seniority. They just can't agree on the tactical elements of how to get the organization to fulfill that particular mission. What would be a starting point or tips or tricks that you would advise this organization to do, or these two people to do?
So I would think, oh my gosh, it's hard not to get into the power dynamics of this. So one of the things that I think about is, I've got so many different things that definitely touch on the power dynamics. And I think part of it is how much autonomy and subject matter expertise is given. I see this a lot in senior leadership teams where, so for example, people will say, well, diversity, equity, inclusion touches everything. And human resources will say, human resources touches absolutely everything. And the CFO will say, finance touches absolutely everything, which is true. However, being able to understand kind of where the boundary lines are with that, and how much consulting and conferring is expected. And I think that's a cultural question, because if you're saying, hey, we want collaborative, we want people, but we also want people to be empowered to execute, those can be very internally inconsistent messages. And if one person or persons on the senior leadership team have an expectation that they are consulted and that their opinions are going to carry significant weight, that's a recipe for conflict. So I think being able to, perhaps even have discussions on the front end to use some of those tools like a racy matrix, who is responsible, meaning who's ultimately responsible for it, who's accountable, meaning, I'm sorry, I think I flipped that around. Who's responsible for kind of doing the task, doing the thing, but who's accountable that the thing gets done, who internally or externally is expected to be consulted. There's like maybe a donor or volunteers there, but also who in our knowledge trust can we reach out to? But then also, as the project is going on, who needs to be informed? And even if I was just working with an IT group, and IT touches everything these days. This whole idea of, if one system is changed, it changes how everybody does their work. And I think one of the complaints that I hear a lot about IT groups and even other groups, that if they change their system or process, there's a cascading effect that then impacts that other people have to change their system or process. So just being able to kind of have those pre-conversations, they don't have to be 100% complete, but just being able to recognize it's not a throwaway conversation, because it goes to assumptions that people have of their role and their level of authority, and also what the organizational culture looks like when actually doing the work or executing on projects.
Yeah, I took away the power dynamic on purpose because it's obviously a little more interesting to start with people who are in similar power dynamics. So if you had, then the next scenario would be people who are in where power does come into play, right? The executive director is more of an authoritarian. They say this is the way, and they expect their people to follow in suit. But maybe some of them or one of them has a conflict with that. That changes things because, of course, now the ED is supposed to be sometimes you can call it the general of the army versus the soldier, and that the general can then strong arm their opinion, and they could harm at least the mental state of that soldier, of the person really trying to help and having a different view. So, is there any tips or tricks or advice you could give organizations or even that particular person to say, look, you're not going to win a power struggle because of the dynamics of it, but here's how another way you could get your point across to have a better influence?
So first and foremost, in any working relationship, there are always, always, always power dynamics. You pointed out there could be positional authority with title. There could be power based on the level of information. There can be power based on relationships. And if you have an employee who is a good friend with the donor, or a good friend with the board, and they're complaining to the board, and then the board's trying to jump in and influence the internal day-to-day operations, that's not good. But there are all of these overlapping power dynamics. So I think everyone's sort of aware of them, but maybe just sort of penciling them out, I think is good. I've got a couple of different bullet points on that. The first is I have spoken to many executive directors, and they will say, well, these are adults and I hired them to do their job. They just need to do their job and figure it out. And oftentimes in working with other people, they will say, you know what? We are at loggerheads. We have two different opinions on how this is supposed to be done. And the reason why you're here, Carol, is because the executive director is conflict averse and won't make a decision. And I find it so interesting that both of them are pointing the proverbial finger at each other. And so I will let the executive director know that it might be that you do have 2 or 3 or 4 different people who have different opinions of what is going to be in their best interest, their team's best interest, and the organization's best interest. And that's what you hire them for. legal is going to have a different, potentially a different opinion than HR, than IT, than finance, than the development directors. And you are hiring them for their divergence of opinion. And sometimes it does come to you as the general to say, based on all of this information, this is the direction that I'm picking, and this is the direction that we need to go. I think that that's important. And it may be, are you assuming that they could or should work it out on their own? And my question is like, well, they're adults. If they could have done it on their own, don't you think they would have done that already? And so, what kind of guidance or parameters are you getting? Then you also have that, then we have someone who is taking that decision making, I'm in control, but how you're executing it, are you actually listening to people? Do people feel heard? Are you articulating back to them what they value and what their professional frameworks and analytical structure are to give you the recommendation? And are you articulating how you're making the decisions? Because I think that's super helpful. And I'm going to give you a little footnote too, is some of the decisions are confidential. Some of them have to remain transparent, and some people are going to be upset or disillusioned in the decision-making process. But for example, if you're looking to merge with another organization, or for whatever types of decisions, if maybe you're looking to hire an interim because there's a succession plan going on, or maybe you're having to make decisions because of some type of, require some type of thing that you cannot articulate. But when people aren't understanding how and why you make the decisions that you do, or that they're feeling injured by how the decision is made or how it's executed, that's where you are eroding their confidence in your own competence as a leader.
I'm really happy you pointed out the fact that there's more than one kind of power dynamic. I was thinking only about hierarchical, but you're right. Access to information and influence are two other power levers or levels that I didn't initially think of. And that's important to distinguish, because some people could have a really, really large influence, even though they're not high on the food chain, so to speak, that their weight or their opinion carries a lot of weight.
Correct. I've seen it in nonprofits where we may have board members who are large donors or volunteers in there. So you're not just managing the volunteers, you're managing someone who sits on the board as well. And we may be friends with them, and it can get a little bit complicated, not impossible, but for a board member to distinguish their role as, I am here on the board to be able to help set direction and to be the supervisor, the boss of the executive director. Would I necessarily have this information, or are people expecting me to take information if they are displeased with how they are being managed or frustrated with a coworker? Then I'm a sympathetic ear as a friend, but then am I taking that and bringing it up at the board meeting? Again, that's the day-to-day operations of it, and a little bit outside the scope of a board member, or a lot outside the scope of a board member. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I also like the fact that you called out that people should be hired and are ideally hired for their talents. They're bringing something to the table, and a good manager will recognize that. I've heard examples of hiring managers will always hire people more intelligent than they are, because they may be good at hiring the people that are good, but it's really the people who have those specific talents that are able to feed the organization. And recognizing that from the beginning, as these people do have different skills and are more proficient in certain skills than I am, and then being able to leverage those skills is a success, or a sign of a very successful manager.
Yeah, and I'll also, I feel compelled to call out that you had asked me earlier, what are some of like the common themes and things that go out. And one of the themes that I've seen a lot in nonprofits is that two different things actually. One is that there may or may not be a comfort with money and finance, and I see it more in organizations that have maybe like social justice and or people services when they're dealing with a lot of income disparity and marginalized communities. That oftentimes I think what is also underlying some of the stuff is what people think about money. Is it good to have money? Is it bad to have money? Is money being evil? Is money driving decisions versus other things? So it's everyone is in a relationship with money in some way, shape, or form. And I think that is more, some in my experience anyway, I haven't taken a poll, more prevalent in nonprofit work. And related to that, as organizations become more successful and they grow, and they might be applying for grants, or they might need to bring on more people. Well, at one point in time was everybody's pitching in, doing everything that it may be more of a kind of a startup mindset where boundaries and rules and systems and processes are a lot more fluid. But then as they grow, the systems and processes need to be repeatable and scalable and much more predictable. And then there's, well, we didn't used to do it that way, and I liked it that way better. And now we have to have a meeting when I could have just popped into Carol's office and Carol had the authority to say, okay, what the heck's going on with this? So I think that how much do people love or hate structure, and where are we in the growth cycle of the organization? And I think also into that of, what do people think about the aspect of money with the nonprofit? Again, the large ones are concerned about money and finance and fiscal stability, but I'm thinking of some of the larger ones, some of the smaller ones, medium size ish ones as well. It seems to be more prevalent.
Mm. So the third scenario I was hoping to talk about is the introduction rather of new systems. And a system could be a process, it could be a technology. And I know there's a huge, not a huge, but a significant portion of change management that gets involved in this, in the idea that people generally don't like change, they get comfortable in what they do, and there's an initial resistance to change. And I was wondering how conflict resolution comes into play for these kinds of introductions.
A couple of different things. One, there are some people who love change. They're excited by it. They like this something new. It offers possibility and an opportunity to do something new and different and grow. And there are other people who are like, it is a nightmare. And I think it also goes back to, do people view that the change in the system or the process or the job description or the emphasis, how does it impact their feeling of success at work? Are we feeling kind of bogged down by this system? Are we feeling as though the other system seemed to work just fine and we're not understanding what's happening? And I also want to say, for change management folks, there's a system and a process, but the other part of change manager, are you trying to change the culture? And those are kind of two different things. But sometimes we think about them in the same vein. So being able to see that some people feel super comfortable and confident and successful, and they know how to do their job. They feel as though their amount of time and talent and energy is getting sufficiently rewarded. But then the change, it may feel clunky and it may feel impeding. And it may feel also, this isn't the job that I signed up for. I didn't, if had I known it would have been like this, I wouldn't have done this. And I think that's another aspect of it, is the job not just how it's being done, but is the job fundamentally changing? And that's what they're reacting to. And recognizing that if you say every change is exciting, no, it's not. To use your analogy of house, I just had some work done on my house and I was really excited about it. Then I'm living through it and I'm like, this is terrible. And it's 6 months later and I still have rooms that look like hoarders, the early years, because I haven't gotten around to getting them cleaned up yet. And so I think people who want a sense that of cleanliness and finality and that it looks smooth and easy, that is really frustrating because it's never smooth and easy. It's always clunky. Same goes for expanding your leadership and your conflict resolution skills. It's clunky at first until you kind of retrain your brain and pull out some language, some tools, some really great questions or some frameworks to help yourself and others navigate through the process.
Not only is it not always smooth and easy, sometimes it's never really done, in the sense that
Yeah.
to a certain extent, you do want to keep on reiterating and getting better and evolving, as opposed to being stagnant and then just not having any kind of progress. So there is a sense of this is a continual investment in the organization to become constantly better, constantly improving our services or offerings, as opposed to, okay, we accomplished everything. Now we can just sit back and, go on to cruise control.
Yeah, wouldn't it be lovely if that was the
Mm.
case? I'm thinking, yes, it can be really frustrating that there are lots of loose ends. And I think if organizations can say there are certain things that we hoped it would accomplish, there are certain things we expected it to accomplish, but I mean, it's like, I'll go back to the house thing. Like when you start rebuilding a house, there's kind of what you planned and sketched. And then there's like, okay, well, that doesn't really look the way we thought it was. And we thought it was going to cost this much, but it's costing this much. And this supply chain's like this, that it is current and evolving, and the workplace is always dynamic. I think of it like I was just planting some pots in my backyard to zhuzh it up a little bit, and you just can't plant the plant and let it go. You have to say, are we watering it sufficiently? Are we keeping an eye on it? Are we getting the results that we hoped for? And what do we need to do? Back to your mom's point of doing kind of the basic maintenance on this, to be able to keep it going, but also a little word of warning, or as my law school professor would have said, a caveat. A caveat is, and I really want the leaders to stop and listen to this, please. You know about changes that happen far, far in advance of everybody else. You are thinking about it. You are having meetings on it. You're thinking about what it is, how you're going to launch, how you're going to implement, who's going to be responsible, what the milestones are. And by the time you launch, you are bored with it. You are like, action, action. We want action. I've talked to organizations like, we've been planning this for 18 months and we're, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days into it. We're just getting resistance and we're not moving as fast. I'm like, well, you've been thinking and planning about it for a year and a half. They're not even caught up yet. They still have questions. And if you're a leader, chances are you are not playing a game of chess. You're playing a game of chess, not a game of checkers. You're not looking one move ahead. You are looking quarters and months and years ahead. And you may be wanting the speed of change to go at your pace of comfort so you don't get bored, or you are challenged. You likely have a lot higher tolerance for doing a lot of things at once, and you may get bored pretty easily. And so if you're expecting everyone to run at your pace, that can also cause conflict and dissatisfaction with you, which in turn you'll see in organizational drag and conflict and displeasure.
I'm turning our attention to current day and AI and maybe the future as much as we can predict it. I'm curious to know how, if any, influence AI has within the domain of conflict management.
So I'm so glad you asked. I've been reflecting on this, and I think it can go on both sides of the equation. First, I don't know how many of your, of the listeners here, follow any type of social media, but, given what I do, I don't think it would be surprising that the algorithm shows me lots of conflict resolution pieces. And there's one woman who I follow who does these little vignettes when someone says, how do you professionally say that's a stupid idea and it's never going to work? And she reframes it to a way that's much more courteous, much more professional, much more collegial. So, in one way, if people could use AI and say, this person is an idiot, they don't know what the hell they're doing, this idea isn't going to work, and we've already tried that. I mean, potentially using AI to say, how can I reframe this in a way that is more professional and more collegial? Words are my tool. Words are my craft. And oftentimes when I coach people, I say, what I'm trying to do is help you be heard by the other person. And that's a bit of a conflict prevention tool. So if we can use AI for that. Similarly speaking, if you want to say, hey, I'd like to be able to say this more persuasively, you can maybe use AI to do that. Or have it, what I see people doing is saying, I'm really stuck on how to approach this. Can you maybe give me a couple of tools or framework to have this conversation? Or can you give me a couple of bullet points to be able to support the point that I'm making? Maybe even saying, how can I say this less argumentatively? So that's one side of the equation of having AI help you use language. You can also maybe even say, ask the question of how are situations like this resolved by other companies? This, or who should I follow to improve my leadership skills? That's one. The other part of the equation, and I've seen this in sort of mediation pieces where people just throw disputes each side and have a third person or an Autobot say, well, this is how it should be decided. Yes, it gives you a decision. And if time is of the essence, sometimes that might be a decision. However, you have to have people agree to that is the way we want to solve problems and have them buy in on how the problems are going to be solved. Like, okay, if we can't agree on this, can we do it? However, that feels very dehumanizing. And there's enough AI out there, and I don't know if all of the listeners can do this, but sometimes you spot something and feel like that feels so generic that I'm not even getting a genuine response. People don't like feeling as though they are a cog in somebody else's machine or that they're just a stepping stone in somebody else's career path. So if we're using the AI to be able to generate options, but having to put your own personal spin, putting your own brand on it, linking with the mission, vision, and values, I think that is a good thing. But if people feel AI'd upon, not great, and it could potentially escalate things. However, I will also say that you are then building language. And if you're saying that doesn't feel genuine to me, or that feels disingenuous, and you feel you're being AI'd upon, being able to say, I kind of feel like that's a solution, but I'm not really seeing you in this. Help me understand why you proposed this. But like every AI, it's a launching pad. And if we're launching into having more deliberate and thoughtful conversations, that can be a good thing.
AI upon, that's a great expression. I've never heard it before, but it makes total sense to me. Thank you for sharing that. I might grab that from you.
Please do. I just made it up. There you go. Trademark Carol Bowser. There you go. AI upon.
Looking forward to the future, any other trends that you see in the realm of conflict management? Do you see, I don't know if things are getting better or getting worse, more conflict, less conflict, or different types of conflict? Just curious to know about just future trends.
I think we're seeing different modes of conflict. I think that it may be a generational thing. However, social media was designed basically to be this century's version of the town crier. Get a box, throw it in the middle of the square, and just yell your opinions out. Maybe to get attention, maybe to compel people to disagree with you. And I'm going to steal this line from a client that I had, or it might have been a podcast that I listened to, or a continuing legal education. It says, we've been really good about calling people out, what we want to do is invite them in to a conversation, because calling people out is blaming and shaming and definitely getting attention, but not in a way that is going to engender cooperation or collaboration or people feel respected and heard. What they do is feeling judged. And I think that they has a tendency to escalate conflict. So being able to teach and train and mentor generations of people to invite people into conversations and to be able to continue those conversations. And also, I'll say that I think that there's an entire generation of people that was kind of that using the technology as their primarily mode of communication. And so not only are we going to be having to train them how to be an employee, but how to be employee within your specific nonprofit, and sometimes to train them into the protocols of the working world.
Yeah, and I would also underline the fact that not every conflict is a us versus them, or at least a zero-sum game, right? Someone doesn't have to win or lose in order for the other person to win. You can have a win-win outcome with conflict.
Correct. You can.
So, Carol, this has been great. Obviously, at some point, organizations get to a point where they are unable to resolve their own conflict, and it's great to then be able to look outside for help, mediation, coaching, whatnot. So, because you do that, could you basically share your ways to get in touch with you so that people can reach out to you in these situations?
Of course, we can always follow me on LinkedIn. Where not too long ago, someone named me one of the top 30 people to follow on LinkedIn for conflict resolution. And that's Carol Bowser. Or you can even find me at the company's LinkedIn page of Managing Conflict or Conflict Management Strategies. The website is managingconflict.com. And if you want to go there and read some blogs, or even sign up for my conflict tip of the day, something I put out Monday through Friday, a tip, a trick, a technique, a link, all designed to help people improve their conflict resolution muscles.
Awesome. Carol, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Alex.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.